Hi, my name's Craig. I'm the partner for Data and AI at FSP. And today, this is my favourite named podcast, which is The Battle for AI. And we're going to talk about what that means to lead in a very confusing and busy world where AI is a lot of hype and a lot of interest. So let's get started. So let's meet the panel.
Hi there, I'm Pete Kemp, Principal Consultant in the advisory team at FSP.
Hi, Simon. I'm one of the founders and directors at FSP.
Hi, I'm Kez. I'm one of the graduate technical consultants here at FSP.
So I mentioned this is my favourite named podcast, The Battle for AI. So I'm just going to go around everyone and ask them, what battle is it you think is going on? And what does peace look like? When does the battle end? So I'm going to start with yourself, Pete. So when you think about the battle for AI, what's one of the battles that's going on?
Yeah, absolutely. And when we spoke about it before, I think we agreed battle is obviously quite a sort of aggressive term for this topic. I probably prefer to think of it more as a competition. And when I think about that, a number of things spring to mind. Obviously, there's competition between the providers of AI technology, Microsoft, Google, OpenAI, DeepSeek, etc., and indeed between countries. A lot of conversations at the moment around the US's supremacy in the space versus kind of China coming up with DeepSeek, and also in the UK starting to invest a lot more in AI infrastructure, a lot of focus around that. But I think for me particularly, it's more around the kind of competition between organisations, and then we're going to get to that in a bit more detail, but also between individuals as well. I think we hear this a lot when we're talking about kind of job displacement, and not necessarily that AI is going to take over jobs and roles, but perhaps people that have a better understanding of AI may sort of pit people to these roles ahead of people who don't. So for me, that's what kind of comes up when we talk about as a competition in this space. I
like it. So lots of mini battles, but more competitions going on in the sort of business space, in the tech space, in the sort of societal space. So Simon, how would you define the battle, or how would you build on what people
I like
say?
battles.
You like battles?
I love battles. I'm up for battles. But yeah, I look at it I sort of look at it through the lens of what some of our customers are facing, which is there's a battle between the opportunity and the risk inside the organisation. So you've got this massive opportunity that AI presents to you, although most people still aren't quite clear what that is. And then you've got all the risks around the ethics and the governance, and how do you make sure you do good things with it and not bad things with it inadvertently? How do you make sure these things work? And I think that's a real front of mind battle for a lot of our customers at the moment. So that's certainly something how I see it. And yeah, maybe battle's a bit of a strong word, but certainly there's a conflictual element to that that I think needs to be resolved.
Yeah, so I both like the competition idea and the battle idea, because it's a battle for survival almost, a battle to stay relevant in this sort of fast changing world.
Yeah.
Kez, anything you want to add to the definition of the space we're going to explore?
Yeah, like Simon, I love the word battle. I really do. But when I think about the battles,
just a very passive person.
Yeah, I like it when I'm on a winning side. That's what battle is. No, I think the battle, certainly in my generation, I find it concerning that the digital, as a digital native myself, a lot of people sort of just they use AI and they absolutely put their trust in it, and I often hear. I don't often hear people go, this is how I validate what AI tells me. It's like, no, I'm going to go use that, and this is what it's telling me to do, so I'm going to do that. And it's like you are trusting something that is not conscious. I think that's like the biggest battle is, I think people don't have, the awareness of how AI works. I've heard people go, it has like a magic. No, it's not. There's complex mathematics behind it. There's engineering. So I think in terms of battle, it's a lack of awareness of the AI systems, and people are like, I'm going to trust it anyway.
Yeah. It feels like there's a battle for relevance as an individual, or particularly when you talked about a native, to the digital world, that early stages in your career, like what is my role as AI is starting to become more prevalent there. And I know you were speaking to the sort of graduate intake we've got. Was there any sort of themes from that conversation that are relevant to what we're talking about today?
Yeah, I think because everyone in the academy are obviously close to my age. I'm 24. So yeah, we call ourselves, digital natives. We've been born into these technologies and we've really been aware of it at such a young age. A lot of them are, ask them, are you worried? Does anything worry you? They're like, well, not really, but if there's anything that worries them, is the fact that they think that there's not enough time or maybe not space for them to upskill. They're very excited. They want to use it, but they want to know more about it. They're very optimistic, but skeptical in terms of, I want to learn more about this, but there's not enough insight. So I think that's one of the, I wouldn't say worry, but they know exactly what they need to do. Very excited about it. So it's
So it sounds like there's quite a lot at front of mind from as a person, as an employee, as a business, as a customer, as a consumer. So yeah, okay. I'm kind of like Pete. I like competition, but I do like battle because it's got a wee edge to it, right? So we talked about battles that they're not necessarily people losing, but how everyone survives going forward. Yeah. So the kind of flow that we want to discuss today is we're going to start with some of the sort of myths and legends around about this space, and then some customer stories, and then some guidance. So let's start with some myths. So what are some of the myths around AI today? So maybe Simon, if I could start with you, can you give us a myth and can you bust it wide open for us?
I think there's quite a few of them, but we'll start with the obvious one, which is AI is a technology thing. And on one level, of course, it is, because it is technology that's driving it, but it really isn't where the root of success is for AI, and the root of success for businesses. So I think those organisations that work out how to drive value from it and understand it well are going to be the people that take a lead. Let's not say that others are going to lose, but they're going to take a lead. And I think those that think that it's just another piece of technology that will get delivered to them are going to probably be on the back foot, I think. Partially because if you think about our own experience with AI and thinking about how we make AI work inside FSP, it was a really interesting challenge we faced, which is where do you put it, right? So because you're looking at, well, actually it affects pretty much everything that we do. So therefore it's not a sort of vertical thing that you can point at and kind of, we could put it there and it'll be fine. It's that actually it's got to go everywhere. And that immediately becomes, that's quite a big subject and quite a big thing to do. And so anyone who kind of thinks, well, actually I can put IT, align that with AI and everything's going to be fine, I think is missing a trick. And it's very difficult to see how to be successful in that way. So that is a big myth, really, that I think people have got. Or maybe a hope that they think it's an IT thing and therefore they can turn away from it for a little while. But effectively, I think that's quite a big challenge for organisations to address.
Yeah. Maybe just add another kind of dimension along the same sort of lines is one of the biggest kind of challenges I see with both individuals and organisations and indeed even nations actually is that it's an area moving so fast. It's difficult to know where to jump in and where to invest. And are you going to make an investment which is going to, overnight by some new kind of startup become completely undermined? But I think, as a part to the kind of the myth point is you can't kind of hold back and wait for these innovations to be made outside of your organization and then jump in. If you kind of take that sort of more passive stance, I think it's going to be in the long run a greater leap to then kind of move forward and start kind of capitalizing on these technologies. So the sooner you can start kind of embedding it into your strategy, building the foundations, and not just kind of adapting AI itself, but building the foundations around people adoption, data governance, all that kind of good stuff, the better position you're going to be to kind of embrace these things going forward.
I'm beginning to realise that I've got a slightly aggressive start on personality because I think we were talking earlier about for me it's kind of a race, and we get people who say, well, I'm not joining that race. And you're like, okay, but the race is running anyway. Yeah. So therefore you are selecting to lose the race at that point in time. So I prefer to think of it as it's okay sometimes to stay on the starting blocks for a little bit and see how everyone else runs off perhaps and get your plan and your strategy sorted. Do that. And then maybe think you might be able to leap past when everything settles down a little bit. But I think to say I'm going to select out, I think is a very difficult thing for any organisation, any business, and actually to a certain degree, increasingly, people to do. It'd be very difficult to see that you can sort of sit there and say, I'm not going to use AI in my role. It's like, okay, well, you don't have to do that, but again, you could lose the race ultimately. So I think that piece of it is quite interesting, and getting that balance right. Different cultures inside organisations will merit different approaches to that. But I do think the way to think about it is everyone should be on the starting blocks, ready to run. And if some people select not to run at this point in time, that's okay.
Yeah.
But some people obviously would look to head off fast.
Yeah. And I think it needs to be a conscious decision.
Yeah.
And you need to own that decision.
Yeah.
So if you're passively going, I'll just wait, that's a conscious decision to not prepare.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So, thank you. So we've got a couple of myths there. Kez, you got a myth you want to bust for us?
Yeah, I tried to think of a different one because that's what I was going to as well. It's very controversial, so I really want to touch into the job displacement. But I think it's that, isn't it? We were talking about this over the weekend, how the AI is moving too fast. There's no point of doing anything now. Again, just as the two gentlemen have touched, it's you don't have to do anything now, but be aware. Yeah. Get to know what is going on, because I'd imagine when internet probably first came out, right, it was probably the same thing when people was like, oh, it's way too technical.
Yeah,
not gonna go. It's like, well, does anybody now go past a day without using the internet? Right? So like what you said, Simon, the race is going anyway, whether you join or not. So don't join a race, but make yourself aware of at least what it is, what's going on. But I think, sorry, I did say I wasn't going to touch on it, so I did. But I think the myth really is you always hear young generations go, we are going to be made redundant because all of these AI things are going to do everything for us. No, they're not. I am aware, obviously, that the jobs will change. And that's fine. I think there's a lot of jobs that would arise from the implementations of and developments of AI, which I think is okay. It's supposed to be embraced. But yeah, I do acknowledge that that comes with a few costs. Like earlier when we were having coffee, I was saying that there's probably a nurse out there that doesn't know how to use a manual sphygmomanometer anymore because there's these digital that can do it for you. But like you said, Craig, I think it's a conscious decision. I'm not. If I want to be a nurse, yes, I can use the digital, but I still need to have those core skills to know what I'm doing to become a nurse. So I think it's going to be the same with AI. Is yes, these things are here to help us, assist us, but you should still be mindful and be conscious that there are core skills that you need. Yeah,
and I think for me a bit of a theme across that is that maturity of the conversation. So if you're still thinking of AI as an IT thing, that's fine. That's a start point. But the conversation's moved on, and it's moved more into this is a business opportunity. And I think it's also moved on a little bit from that as a societal people opportunity. So it's where are you on that spectrum? So let's bust that myth. It's an IT thing. You can't keep it in an IT box. That's a recipe for disaster, You can't wait, right, to get started because it's happening to you, right? And from a people perspective, whether it's the employee or the leader, you need to be thinking about that. And if that is daunting, one of the good things to do is surround yourself with clever people that talk about it. So this is a big change coming, and if you don't have, I use the phrase, you need new pals on this journey, right? So if you've not done this before, surround yourself with people who've done that before and think about what, as a leader, you bring to the game. Pete, you were going to add something?
Yeah, I can just pick up on one other kind of myth that Kez kind of touched on there, which is that AI is not the kind of the magic bullet silver bullet for everything. And that it can actually be quite a kind of destructive myth, I've found. So I joined FSP about the time Copilot went into general availability. So I've been helping lots of companies kind of adopt Copilot. And one of the big kind of barriers I see with people who start to kind of use it is they jump into it. It's like, oh, can't do that. You can't do everything I need to as part of my day-to-day job. And that can be quite a kind of detrimental barrier because it means that they don't then kind of go back to it and take the time to understand how to kind of weave it into their workflow, but sort of understanding that it is, for Copilot particularly as an assistive technology that's going to help you as part of your day-to-day, but it's not going to complete kind of end-to-end processes, is a kind of key myth to sort of debunk.
There's two ends to that myth as well, aren't there? Because I think I see, like, one myth is AI is just the same as everything we've seen before and isn't different, and the other myth is AI is completely transformative and the world's going to change. Probably the truth is somewhere in the middle of that. But you see both sides of those equations. And I think it's quite interesting, again, for people to try and figure out, okay, well, what does this really mean? I think if I was to characterise it, because I do think it's transformative for two reasons, really. One is, if you think about how it works, one of the fascinating things about how it works, it is non-deterministic. So it works in an entirely different way to what we've been used to in IT world. We go, if we see this, do this, then this, then this, and then this thing comes along and says, well, I might do that, but I might take a slightly different approach. That's one big challenge we've got to get our heads around. And I think the other thing is just kind of the general impact and the pace of which that impact will hit us. So if you think the internet came along, that felt like quite a quick cycle from like something that's, we dial up. I mean, back when I first started using it, it was dial up and that sort of stuff. And Kez is looking at going, what is dial up? I don't know what that is. So, but it took off quite quickly. But one thing has been consistent throughout my whole career, which is the cycle of change happens faster and faster and faster. And if you look at where AI is going, I mean, it just accelerates and accelerates and accelerates. And I think that's a really interesting challenge for every level that interacts with it. So you think people, businesses, countries, the world is trying to deal with stuff that tomorrow somebody will say, we can now do this and we can now do that. And you're like, oh, what does that mean? Every day you're seeing some new announcement of something that will build a business. You see something, this, I don't touch anything in my AI, built me $100,000 a month business and that sort of stuff. And it's just kind of a different world we're going into. So I think the hype bit of it is just we sit on either, there's a normal distribution of views and actually no one, we were discussing a little bit, no one's interested in the middle view. Yeah. Because the middle view is boring, right? So actually everyone wants the extreme views of everything. It's going to be a fantastic, amazing thing. It's going to be an absolutely disastrous thing. It's going to be transformative. It's going to be a big con. Everyone sits on either side of those things because it's more interesting to talk about. Yeah. I would hope it sort of sits somewhere in that normal distribution in the middle. Because I think that's where the optimum ethical perspective is as well, is in that middle piece. So that's definitely a myth, though, for me. Yeah. I hear people say it all the time. Oh, it's just another piece of tech. It's like,
and I find that's convenient phraseology to allow you to avoid the conversation, right? So we could have a leadership meeting about AI and go into the fear or that it's overhyped, right? But it stops you getting into the middle, which is like practically making a decision, right? And it's like it's a defense mechanism that people have got that is going to be less useful as you go on, because as you say, like every time you're standing there, the world is going on, and getting on that conveyor belt early is a good thing.
Yeah, I was going to say I love your point there, Simon. In physics, there's something we call singularity, which in essence I'm going to simplify it, but no one knows what's going to happen. But this is why it's exciting. This is why this is not the time to pause. It's not the time to stop. Get on with it. Get to learn it because it will impact you differently from maybe how the person next to you will be impacted, and only you can decide that for yourself.
Actually, it's because we're sort of starting to kind of come to that sort of middle point that I'm finding particularly exciting these days. It's an exciting place to be these days. So I jumped into kind of AI in sort of 2019, and and there was sort of lots of great kind of applications, but there was also a lot of kind of pontificating about where it was going to go and stuff. But the stuff I'm really enjoying is now rolling these platforms out at scale and having these debates about how they impact people's day-to-day lives and day-to-day workflows, and some of the kind of thorny challenges around policy and ethics and governance within large organisations that I find particularly exciting place to be.
Wonderful segue, Pete. It's almost like we've prepared this, right? So now that we've got a few myths and we've bust those myths, let's move on to something. What is informing our opinions on that? And it's mostly our experiences as individuals and our experiences working with customers. So I'm going to ask you to kind of share a customer story or experience. So I'll start with you this time, Simon. Is there a particular customer story or experience you want to share with us that is helping shape your view of that kind of practical approach?
There's probably a few, but I have to be careful which ones I select because I don't want to nick any of Pete's. So I'll talk about a recent one actually where we've been working with a government department that has been defining their future IT strategy. So we've been working quite closely with some stakeholders there to work out what that looks like. there's quite a big, so there's 5 or 6 themes they're operating on, one of which is AI in and of itself. They've created an AI sort of theme, which again I think a lot of people will do, and so working through with them what that meant and what they were going to do was quite interesting, because that was where the rubber really hit the road. It was like, okay, you said you're going to do something, what exactly are you going to do? So actually where we landed in the end, in the early days, was a combination of policy frameworks and ethics needs to get defined, and the reason for that is, although it's for a lot of people very dull, it is also the guardrails by which you can run faster. So because you now know what the rules are and you can operate, as long as you operate within those rules, you can go. So that was quite important. And the other one actually was around experimentation. So the other big theme that came out of the AI piece was starting to experiment with some of these things with a view to taking some of the more successful experiments and putting them into a real world scenario, which I thought was a really good approach, because it was like not saying we're going to go all in and be like, it's going to be amazing. It was like, actually, let's work out how this stuff works. And some of the stuff that you've been involved with, it's really interesting how some people will go like, this is amazing, it's transformed my world. And other people will go, this didn't really do it for me. And so stepping in gently to see where the real value is versus the Moores sort of situation is I think quite important. So yeah, that's been a really interesting. That's an early stage engagement which we typically get involved in, which is like, okay, what do you need to do next? What you got to think? What's important? I have a fairly strong view that you should be starting out with some kind of policy committee understanding, because I don't think it's right to say to your organisation, do AI, and everyone goes off in different directions and starts doing different things, and then you try and gather it all back later, because that will be bad. I think it's better to put some light touch guardrails in place so that when people launch, they're all launching in the same direction.
Yeah. It's the sort of equivalent of there's nothing more daunting than a blank sheet of paper, right? So how do you narrow the conversation into the space that's meaningful? So those guide rails, those policies, those reality checks. And I think good people will thrive in that, that box. You create a box, go and innovate, go creative in that box. But when it's go forth and do AI, you're kind of setting yourself up for disaster. Pete, you got a story you want to share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So this one's more around kind of highlighting some of the initial trepidation around AI, and then the eventual kind of success and benefits that we're kind of realising, the people involved as part of that process seeing them. So this was working for a large national young person's children's charity, and we helped deliver their first chatbot solution. And the challenge that we're trying to solve was that a lot of young people in very kind of challenging circumstances were coming to the line. They were having to be held for long periods of time, waiting for availability of counsellors. So they saw a lot of kind of drop off, and then a lot of sort of frustrated people when they eventually did come to the kind of counsellor discussion. So we implemented a conversational AI based solution that would provide some of the kind of the triaging process for those young people, understanding kind of what their challenges are, and then also to some extent kind of gamifying that process, so it kind of kept them engaged and enjoying the sort of 20 or so minutes that they had before they then eventually spoke to the counsellor. And as I say, there was a lot of trepidation around this solution initially, obviously a lot of fear around AI and both in terms of, in these very challenging circumstances, is it going to do the wrong thing, and also for the counsellor and the great work that they're going to do, is it going to detract from them? But once we did a lot of work to kind of understand the young people and the audience and what we wanted to achieve, and so that when we delivered it, I think one of the my favorite things about the program was the testimonials that we eventually got from the counsellors, that it's really enabled us in what we're doing and provided much better outcomes for the young people in need. They came to conversations in a much better mood, much more prepared, and similarly the counsellor, because they could see the transcripts of the kind of conversations ahead of their session, were much better prepared to kind of have much better engaging conversations. So yeah, definitely one of my more favourite kind of AI based.
So do you think that the end result for that was the aggregation of AI and the counsellor was a better outcome.
Yes, yeah.
That was the feedback they had. Because again, I think there's a when you get into the ethics of it, it's like, do you have an AI technology or do you have more counsellors?
Yeah.
Right. So, because there's a question there about like,
yeah,
you're taking some sensitive situations.
Yeah.
So that's what I was really interested in. Is like if the end result is actually net benefit, that's a great example of where there's some ethical decisions that have to get made. Some quite serious ethical decisions that have to get
absolutely.
made.
Yeah.
And then you have to really test and prove those principles out.
Yeah.
So again, your framework for how you prove these things and you prove the benefit and you remove the risk and you remove the harms and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
That must have been quite prevalent in that project.
Yeah, absolutely. It was kind of front and center right from the beginning of the process. It was very much like these are the kind of the guardrails and the area which AI is going to play. These are the interactions that it's going to be able to answer.
Yeah.
But it's all about building better engagement with the counsellors and the good work that they do, rather than replacing.
And would you? That was a little while ago, I guess.
Yeah, it was a while ago. Yeah.
So.
This was before ChatGPT had taken the world.
So would you see that as more problematical now? Because obviously it was easier to constrain bots a while ago because you sort of gave them the knowledge, whereas now you've got GPT which can go anywhere. Would you see it as a higher risk now or a lower risk?
I mean, I think even in that scenario, they'd still kind of they'd still be maintaining those guardrails.
Yeah.
Certainly, and there's been good examples of charity-based chatbots that have been let loose with kind of generative AI and given incorrect information.
Yeah.
So I think they would still be ensuring that those kind of guardrails are in place. But I think there's probably kind of there'll still be kind of good use cases for generative AI in that scenario.
Yeah.
I think most particularly in what we're seeing from clients is actually more sort of knowledge-based assistance for the counsellors as opposed to kind of directly for the user.
Yeah.
So that they're able to kind of better research and get their answers.
And apply skill to it.
Exactly.
And that feels like a really powerful story about how you make a counsellor more impactful and improve more people's lives, right? Which is a much better story than going, I installed some AI and got some AI to work, you know? So thinking about those outcomes and thinking about the people whose life we can make better that's one of the things I took from the story. Is like a good way to focus. So if we've got those guide rails, the next step is to kind of focus in on the people and how we can make their lives an awful lot better. Kez, you got a story you want to share with us?
Yeah, no, I haven't worked with a customer before, but I have helped somebody for free. Simon's looking, it's like a free consultation. What's going on here?
I do it all the time.
So yeah, well, she is a friend. She works at a private health sector, and she on her day-to-day job is she does a lot behind the screen, but on top of that has to look after 6 different patients. And she's coming to me and she was like, "What do you know about this Copilot? How can it make my life easier?" I said, "I don't know much, but this is what I know about it." And she, not that she isn't a reader, but she generally doesn't have time. Their business themselves, they don't have enough resources to do all of the things that they need to do. So anyway, she told her about Copilot can help you with summarizing X, Y, and Z, but I'd tell her things like you have to validate it in this certain way. It can't be obviously dependent. So she's come back. She's like, this is amazing. This is really helping me. So yeah, I sort of just went and told her how I use Copilot in my everyday life at FSB, and she's found it really, really helpful. So it was a free consultation.
But I think just before you jump in, Pete, it's like that's that thing about surrounding yourself with people who have been there before. So you're as a leader, as an organisation, you're not the first to go into this. There's people that have been there before. So start to surround yourself with people that's a bit further on the journey, can share those experiences and help. Sorry, Pete, you were going to jump in.
Yeah, I was going to pick up on something you mentioned around kind of not having a great deal of time and making time for these solutions. As I mentioned, helped a number of organisations roll out Copilot and part of their kind of trial programs and sort of getting users on board. But I find one of the biggest challenges is people's time and availability to invest in these tools and really understand, because it isn't sort of, cookie cutter sort of end-to-end process that's being replaced. It's about understanding as part of your workflow, where does it fit in? Where do you see the most benefit? And one of the biggest challenges we've had with users is about them just having that time. And there's that phrase of kind of take time to make time. I've never seen it more truer than with kind of technologies like this. So that, again, for an individual basis, ensuring that you're investing in kind of exploring these technologies.
I think the interesting thing for me about that experience is that where everyone's worried about it's going to take my job, it's going to take we don't run across many people who have got loads of hours in the day.
Yep.
And are trying to find time to fill in the day, right? Everyone's normally got way too many things to get done. And therefore, anything you can give them, if they can't even find the time to investigate what might save them some time,
absolutely,
then they're hardly at risk from the implementation of this technology. They're probably going to have a changed role because a lot of them, my hope for it is that a lot of the mundane activities that you spend a lot of time doing get removed from your day to focus on higher value things that you're actually making a difference on. And I don't think most of the people that we run across, anyway, I'm sure there are exceptions to it, most of the people that we run across are up to their eyeballs, never get through their list of things to do in a day, and anything that would sort of give them a fighting chance of doing that, I think would be very interesting. That's kind of I think that's why I don't see the disaster that maybe other people see.
And you go.
I was going to say, on the other side of the fence, you've got I don't say young people just because this is how I've seen. And the other, when we talk about Copilot with that friend, she isn't as young as me, but I tell her this is a good tool to like you said, Simon. If it makes you efficient, do the mundane task. This is the one for you. This is the assistant you need. But on the other side of the fence that Simon was doing, I'd imagine there's important, the more important you become in the business, like you said, you can never go through your list, but this is a good tool. But on the other side of that, there are some people who, this is going to make me efficient. An hour worth of work, I can do it in 15 minutes. So the rest of the 45, I'm just going to go chill. It's like, well, again, being conscious of that, being mindful, but it happens.
Be mindful about that, I think. And I think it's interesting to say, I think that's rarer than people think it probably is, that those sorts of things happen. And the sort of things that you see yourself, like I've found quite a lot of success with. You start at the beginning of a day, and there's X emails, X things on your task list, X team messages sitting there for you, all these things, and it's like, okay, what am I going to get done today? And one of the things that's been quite interesting recently is to take all that and give it to an AI tool and say, where should I focus today? And actually, it's generally pretty decent at coming back with the priorities, even though, what's quite interesting about it is it comes back with the things you need to do, not the things you want to do. Because I've noticed as well, that's one of my things, it's like, these are the things I'm going to do. When you ask AI, it goes, these are the things you should be doing. And it's like, there is a bit of a difference between the two. So that focus thing, so those sorts of things, that could save you half an hour of going through things and trying to figure out what your day looks like, and gets you into the day a lot quicker. So little things like that, I think, are the things where people are going to win in the short term rather than massive change.
That theme of time, what you're going to do with your time, getting more time. On the flip side of that, a bit of a pattern is, if you do your AI transformation side of desk, you're setting yourself up to fail. So there's that kind of, I don't have the time, but you need to make, this is something that, as we said, we can't put in a small box, right? It's going to affect everyone. So a pattern is people setting themselves up for success is having the right leader in place to drive that through an organisation. So, and the criteria shouldn't be who's available, right? It should be who's going to lead us through this and put the time and effort into it, as opposed to doing it as a side of desk, which is another form of prevaricating, I think. So, other theme that has been touched on is ethics, right? So the ethics of what we're doing. So I'm going to bring this sort of section to a close with asking you to join me in my time machine, right? And travel like 5 years into the future to 2030, where a lot of this, so we've got our head around how AI is going to get used. We've realised it's about making people more impactful. We've got the guardrails for success. But I don't think ethics is going to go away, right?
No.
So we're in the year 2030. What sort of ethical debates or challenges are we having? And how does that relate back to the leader today? What should you be thinking about today to get yourself to a successful 2030, right? Everyone's looking like, don't ask me that question first. Okay? Right? So, Kez, sorry, I'm going to get you're first in the time machine. What's happening in 2030, and what are we thinking about?
Oh, we just like big questions, don't we? Wow, I don't know if I have an answer for that, but if I am now sitting here, 32 years old, one of the debates I could think about is, the way certainly now, the way, AI systems work is obviously it learns from the data, the training data sets that we give them, right? Sometimes I look at my nephews and nieces and think, they learn from what the parents teach them, right? Like all of us been molded from, what your parents say what's good and what's bad and all these things. And so AI is the same, it needs to learn. It will only do good if it learns good. And, I don't try and be as negative, but it really is like the world has the worst of us. You see it all the time in the news and the internet, it's always posted the bad things. So in terms of ethics, I don't know if I have a definitive answer on this. It's,
Well, what I hear you talking about is if I'm looking back in 2030, I would be saying, I'm glad that I fed the AI engine with more than just the sound bites on the internet, right? I'm glad I fed the AI engine with truth and other points of view. That's what I was hearing coming from you. Am I putting words in your mouth?
Yeah, no.
Yeah, you are.
Yes, yeah. Do you want any of those words?
Yeah, I'll take them. I'll have them.
Yeah. It's that. I think it's No, I don't know if I have a definitive answer on that, Craig. It's, I told you about how I love the open AI's, the statement around advancing AI that will benefit all humanity. Yeah. And I just think that, when it comes to ethics, it would only know the right ethics if we tell them the right ethics.
Yeah. And I think it's, ethics, we talked about this before, is like are subjective by nature, right? So you can kill that conversation by going, well, if ethics is subjective, how am I ever going to make my ethical policies? And I know you had a great retort for it, Simon, so I'm going to kind of pass on to you, like in 2030.
Yeah, I mean, on that subject, I'll talk about that and talk about where I think 2030 is going to be, but in terms of the ethics side of things, we could spend a lot of time arguing about what's ethical and what's not ethical, and that's because we all have different views. And so if you think about one country versus another, one business versus another, one individual versus another, our ethics will be slightly different. And so that's why we would say to a customer, you can't go to the ethical website policy writing tool and just take it off the shelf and say, because actually you're a different culture and your people are different. And so you've got to build up on that. And the other thing that we were discussing the other day was how ethical policy can only go one way. So if government defines the ethics of how AI gets used, you can't step back from that to a worse position, because that will be possibly legislation, certainly guidance that says you can't step back. Typically, most organisations try to do better than government says. So you then take the next step up and you go, well, we're going to do this on top of that. And then the teams within your organisation will take the next step up from that, and then the individuals will take the next step up from that. And so everyone's got a slightly different definition. And I think what that probably means, this isn't a 2030 thing, this is a now thing. Everyone's going to be equally happy and unhappy with the ethics that get established. And, you've seen some circumstances where, people on the floor of the organisation are unhappy about what's going on. I would say that makes an argument for light frameworks at the top of government and expansion down. I don't think we'll ever get to the point where there's a kind of, there will be some kind of global agreement of some description, but I don't think we'll ever get to a global agreement, because in truth, at country level, because you look at every country, the ethics will be entirely different about, how hard do you drive capitalism through things versus how hard do you not do that? And you'll never get that squared off. But in terms of 2030, it's a really interesting question around the ethics of it. I'd like to think, So again, to me, it's a spectrum of things, right? We know, based on human nature, some people will do some good things, some people will do some bad things, right? And so actually the reality is we always have to hope that people do more good things than bad things. And I genuinely believe that. I don't think people get up in the morning to do bad things as a rule. So I think if we look at it in that view, I see the future is a lot of the stuff that we do today that is maybe time-consuming, demotivating, makes us less able to maximise our opportunity, not from a commercial perspective. This is more of an opportunity for the life that you can lead.
Yep.
I think that's going to be amplified by 2030. And if I use an analogy for that, because I'm not a digital native, funnily enough, I got my first job from a newspaper advert. Okay, so Kez is looking at me like, what the hell? What?
That used to happen.
But at some point in time when the internet came along, when I selected my first job, I had to look at the employer and go, how are you going to drive my career? Right? Then the internet comes along, and now it's actually, you don't really need your employer to drive your career. You drive your career. So if you get up tomorrow and you go, I don't know if I just want to be a carpenter, guess what? You get on the web and you start researching being a carpenter, and in 2 years' time, you could probably call yourself a carpenter, right? In my day, that was not possible to do that, right? You couldn't suddenly change your mind, because if you wanted to know about being a carpenter, you had to go and be one, be an apprentice, or go to the library or whatever, right? You roll that forward into AI, where any answer you need doesn't even need the effort to search on the internet. I think what that allows everyone to do is to massively expand their horizons in their interests. You know, notice you talked about singularity, so we have a common shared interest in physics, I suspect. So you know, and I can vent that interest far easier than I ever could before with the use of AI. It's much more of a learning experience for me, rather than reading stuff on the internet and that sort of stuff and having a conversation with an AI engine, so that your boundaries expand. So I hope the ethics are that we've got way more opportunities than we've ever had in our life, and that the basic underlying guidance is that we follow human nature, as you try to do good most of the time, and occasionally you'll mess up and do something bad, but hopefully that wasn't intentional. And if we can get to that point, I think broadly speaking, again, we hear all the time the polarised views of this. You hear the extremist views, and I think they are niche views.
Yeah.
But they're the things that make the headlines. They're the things that everyone talks about. So therefore, you think that's what it is. Everyone else is in the middle.
Yeah.
And they're just trying to do a good thing. And I think I'd rely on humanity to sort that out, you know. And I'd just be I'd put a few guardrails in for commerciality, that's all, because I think, sometimes humanity can get lost in the pursuit of commercials. So
I mean, I like, so we're feeding the future with a balanced information. We're setting the guidelines of how to do good, and we're improving. So nice practical advice. So no pressure, Pete, right, on you now. So what's your 2030 view of the world?
Well, I'm going to slightly take the pressure off myself by starting by saying I think anyone who thinks they're able to kind of predict where we're going to be in 5 years, I don't think they can. So, for instance, I was working with GPT-2 at the time, and ChatGPT took me by storm as much as it did everyone else. But I think, as you're saying, like, I suppose I gave a sort of slightly easier answer, but also go down the philosophical rabbit hole a little bit. In that, I think there will be a kind of amplification of what we're feeling now, with AI increasingly taking on kind of more and more tasks, and particularly work tasks in which we've spent a lot of time building our own personal value around. How do we sort of navigate that value in our kind of day-to-day lives, and how does that shift? Is something I'm already starting to kind of grapple with, and I've got a couple of kids who are growing up and going through school, and sort of trying to kind of support them in understanding how this technology can help with their studies. What that will be like for them is, like as we've said, with them as with myself, I've hopefully tried to help them kind of start to kind of grapple with these technologies. But I think that kind of question around kind of where our value is and how we want to spend our time will be kind of increasingly come to the fore. And that's why you see so many kind of posts around on LinkedIn and what have you around like I thought these robots were going to do the washing so I can spend more time doing art. Not more art doing the art so I can spend the time doing the washing. But yeah.
So I'll put in my...
Sorry.
On you go. Go for
I
it.
was just to say, I think it'd be interesting when you talk about your children. So you're providing the ethical guidelines today. But if you imagine you're born today and you're born in as an AI native, where might your ethics come from in the future?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah.
So
absolutely.
It might not come from the parents as much anymore.
Yeah.
And again, that's a bit interesting question for people who are building this stuff to think about. And does touch on, when we were talking the other day about like, where do you get your AI from?
Yeah.
And everyone said, well, it doesn't really matter until DeepSeek came along.
Yeah.
And everyone went, well, I'm not sure we can run the DeepSeek model because it's from China.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so people do care. Whether that's relevant or true or not is debatable, but certainly people do care. So I think as it becomes more embedded into society, and I do think increasingly people will interact not just for work. And straight admission, sometimes I struggle to get to sleep, right? So one way I talk to ChatGPT and I say, let's have a little discussion. Everyone's looking at me like I'm nuts now.
We can always edit this bit out.
That's right,
So
exactly.
just go
I don't mind. So, but literally, let's have a little discussion like about the day that helps me go to sleep. Right? That's not a work thing.
Yeah.
That's like to be fair, sometimes I get woken up because the conversation gets quite interesting.
Yeah.
I think, this is quite interesting. But the reality is I'm going to that tool for something more than just productivity.
Yeah.
And actually, a little experiment the other day, which was I changed the voice. I hated it.
Yeah.
Absolutely hated it. And it was really strange because it was like, why do I care about what the voice is? And it really makes you, on one tiny level, I've become attached. And I think that's quite, and I'm not a digital native and I'm not an AI native, but imagine growing up with this stuff now. I think it's really interesting to see where that goes. I'm not saying it's a bad place, but
I think
it's interesting to think about.
I mean, it opens up a conversation around like what do we value in human interaction and what do we fear in human interaction. So it's actually sometimes easier to talk to something as a machine.
Yeah, definitely.
Because it's not going to judge you, right? And it's not going to go anywhere. Well, in your social life, it's not going to go anywhere to impact you. So I've found myself. I expect different things from a human interaction than I do from an AI interaction. And again, don't view it as a competition, but like I'll get strength from this, I'll get strength from that. So again, it's not being fearful of some of those things.
Right? If you're not aware of the technology, so again, a good reason to not interact with a human is challenge, right? So you and I might disagree on something, and you'll say I disagree with you, and we could have a heated debate about it, and that's very valuable. It's really difficult to get an AI to do that with you.
Yeah.
It agrees with you most of the time, and it's got some really extreme views. And again, the societal impacts of that are very interesting, which is, do we end up with a situation where it's very difficult to confront people because people are used to interacting with a technology that never disagrees with them, and then you come along and go, I don't agree with you.
Yeah.
And everyone goes, what do you mean you don't agree with me?
Yeah.
So it's going to be those sorts of things. That's the sort of interesting view. Maybe it's a bit further out than 2030, 2040 maybe, but I'm really interested if I can last that long to see what that looks like. So,
Pete?
Can I just pick up on the bedtime AI support, and a great use case for anyone in this situation is awesome for bedtime stories. So you can describe your kid and their sort of likes and where they're from and stuff, and it comes up with awesome.
Yeah. This is not where I thought the conversation would go. Right? I'm enjoying it, but I'm conscious I want to start bringing it to an end. So it's great. So, but for me, is just what we've done in a short amount of time is free ourselves up from the now and start to think about the future and the consequences of decisions we make now and the advice we would give ourselves if we could go back in time. So for me, there's a leadership thing about, again, linking that to not side a desk is you need to have the headspace to drive this. So yes, it is similar to other changes, but as we said, it's different as well. The scale of it, how many people it's hitting, the pace that it's going at. So I'm going to kind of bring us to that, the kind of so what moment in the conversation. So hopefully people are still with us, right? They're going, this is a really good conversation, right? I'm enjoying it. But like, as a leader,
odd, I'd imagine, but there you go.
yeah, I'm born optimist, right? So they've got that far, and they're going, I can't wait for the punchline. And the punchline is, can you give me a piece of practical advice? So So just one sort of snappy piece of practical advice for so imagine the person watching this and going, I have been prevaricating. I have not started my AI journey. I am responsible for that for my organisation. What one piece of advice would you give them at this point in time? So I'm going to start with Pete and come back around this way. So Pete, give us your one piece of advice.
Apologies if this covers off a few.
Yeah,
but,
so go for it.
I think one of the important things that we kind of touched on was kind of around setting parameters. So setting parameters in which your organisation is able to adopt and explore AI. And I think certainly to your point, Craig, it helps with that kind of blank sheet of paper. It gives people some parameters in which to work with. But once you have, really spend that kind of time and investment in empowering your employees with that technology that you've provided and you've decided upon, although that kind of governance that you've decided upon. I think one of the key challenges, if you do just step back and let people and not kind of engage as an organisation, is often your employees are going to do it anyway, and they're going to do it with ungoverned technology and technology that has the potential, doesn't meet your ethical requirements, has the potential to kind of leak your IP, etc., etc., etc. So putting in that time and investment to set those parameters, but then really kind of empower your employees with the tools and the governance that you've decided upon.
I love it, because one of the things we were talking about is like the role of the leader is sometimes to step out the way, right? Don't stop. So the guardrails, give people the guardrails and step out the way and let people really embrace it.
Yeah,
great piece of advice. Yeah, Simon, what's your parting wisdom, your guiding principle?
Sorry for Kez, I was going to last, but not so sorry that I'm not going to make her do it this time. Mine's pretty simple, which is think strategically but act tactically.
Yeah.
So think about where you need to go. That will change. Strategies always do. But take small first steps. Yeah. And that's why I think the customer I was talking about earlier, they're thinking about the framework, the ethics, the long-term picture, but they're experimenting with small things to say, actually, there's the real big thing that we can, that's what we can expand on and invest on. And that's what I would say is, start on that basis, because it is not as complicated as people think it is, and you can build some pretty amazing things in very, very short spaces of time. Think strategically, act tactically.
Oh, and I think that your brain behaves in a different way from thinking about it to doing it.
Yes.
And getting into the doing it, it will be a lot easier. I'm not saying it's easy, but it'll be a lot easier once you're into the doing phase than the excuses not to do phase. Yeah. Kez, we've put undue pressure on you, right?
Yeah.
So,
Actually, as well.
yeah. So, any guiding principles, thoughts, or even questions you would like to leave in people's minds?
Yeah, I was going to say, I was also going to apologise that it wasn't going to be a piece of advice. It wasn't even going to be an advice. It was going to be a couple of ask. I think an ask for you three, who's more in a senior position than I am, be transparent. Just communicate. I think letting everyone know that these are the changes that's happening, so you don't leave people going, I'm going to be redundant, like what's going on. But I think open communication is super important. Really, we have winning behaviors of being crystal clear and being on it. Let's be on it. Let's be crystal clear with what changes are going to arise. And for the individuals, I think be mindful and be aware of looking into AI systems that are transparent, know how they end up in those decision making, the process of how they decide, be aware of what hallucination is and what it does and things like that. I think the first ask is that open communication to everyone, specifically obviously FP people like myself. But for the individuals, invest. If you're going to develop, if you're going to develop an AI system, make sure that it's transparent, that everyone can see behind this algorithm, how do they work? Just make it transparent.
Awesome. So I think I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, right? You've also made it hard for me. I've got to have some pithy sum up at the end of this conversation that went in lots of different directions. Good luck with that, right? So, but before I do that, I'd hate for you to leave today with something you wanted to say and didn't get a chance to say. So just quickly, anything that you didn't get a chance to say that you want to share?
I think Kez definitely raised a fair point about transparency that we haven't really touched on this, which is both organizational transparency about what you're doing and why you're doing it and what you're trying to aim for. And again, that to me is all about the ethics of it, what you're trying to achieve and that sort of stuff. And then there's the more technical aspect of transparency, which is how did you come to that decision, which again, a lot of our clients are struggling with, which is I can't just say this was the input and this was the output and not be able to define what the decision-making process was in between. And so that's been a challenge for a few people recently, and obviously the new thinking models are helping a little bit with that, because at least you get some narrative about what the logic is. But I think that transparency piece, once that properly opens up, so you've got both, or it's two separate subjects in a way, but organizational transparency about what you're trying to achieve, what you're trying to get to, that sort of stuff. And then model transparency. Why did you say yes to that versus no? Both of those things are really good subject areas that we probably didn't touch on, but are quite important to think about.
I'm going to bank those as trailers for another podcast, right? So like
the battle for AI transparency.
Yeah, part 2.
Part two.
Or the competition for AIP. So, Kez, anything else you want to add? No, based on that.
Well, also I think with as I was talking about, open communication and transparency. I think in the business we're not all technical. There are some people that are not as technical. I think making the language accessible to them. What is a large language model? What is an agentic AI? What is generative AI? Because a lot of people, even though they're working in a tech consulting company, they go, "Oh yeah, AI is ChatGPT." Yeah. That's all they know. Yeah. And there's so much more to that. Yes, there's an element of, well, you need to go out there and educate yourselves, but why is that not being spoken about in the world we're in now, in the space we worked in every day anyway?
It's true. I think Chris Brower, who obviously spoke at our kickoff this year, is very good at speaking in very simple terms, and almost lit the room alight when he started to talk to people about get used to the idea of working with agent teams and working with. They're not working for you; you're working with them, and you can see lots of people going, "Oh, what the hell does that mean?" But they're the conversations, I think, again, that are important to have. And it was fantastic for us to have that conversation because, well, you're trying to corral everything we're doing around AI at the moment. So maybe it wasn't as good for you because it sort of set up a million hairs off running about what it was doing. But that simple language about what's going to be different for you as a person, I think really does bring it to life for people. And actually, again, most people's response in fact, all the responses we've had were not fear. Yeah. They were excitement and this could be amazing. And so I'm really excited to get on the journey. Now we're just trying to hold a tidal wave back of things.
Well, what I'd say is the best outcome for me, right?
Yeah.
Because it is about prioritising, focusing, the guardrails, all the things that we talked about. Yeah. A vision, a direction, guardrails. What do we own? What do we give to people to run with? So it's channeling that excitement. But your parting words, okay?
Yeah, I skipped before, but
this
one's come to
is
mind.
for the extended edition of the podcast.
Yeah.
We've got a mini one and an extended one. Right, your final parting words.
Cool, awesome. Yeah, so I mean, sort of reflecting on some of the things that have just been mentioned, I don't think I can finish it without kind of touching on accessibility, AI and accessibility. And I think, again, sort of reflecting on helping organizations to roll out particularly assistive AI like Copilot. Some of the most wonderful anecdotes around people who have frankly been described previously as maybe a bit Luddite when it comes to like technology adoption, but have seen fantastic kind of engagement with it because of the way particularly those technologies interact with you on a very kind of human-like basis, and it is a very kind of simple interface to understand and work out. That's been some of the most kind of pleasing things to see is how people who previously hadn't with kind of technology adoption seen that kind of success have. And then similarly, from a kind of neurodivergent perspective, how supportive these technologies can be. And again, I've sort of seen that in play with lots of people across lots of different, quite diverse organizations. So.
Yeah, just on the accessibility piece that Pete was talking about, let's not assume that people know what the technical terms are. We need to let people understand what things like agentic AI is, generative AI, large language models. What are these things? You know, making the language more accessible. It's like whenever I have something so complex that I don't understand, what I often do is I go and ask a large language model and go, can you explain this like I'm a 10-year-old, right? Like, let's do that. Let's do that live. And I think, you know, let's go back to basics. I think there's always value in explaining things simple. You know, Einstein said it himself, right? If you can't explain something simply, you don't actually fully understand it. So let's make it simple. Let's make it more accessible.
Yeah. And just a kind of, just on that point, actually, I think where we've seen some of the biggest success in AI adoption is building a champion community. So people who can take these, as you say, quite complex concepts, but bring it to life for their team members and the people in their kind of business area. For kind of central functions, it's almost nigh on impossible to really understand how these tools can help in people's day-to-day work processes. But by building that kind of champion community that does intimately know that, can really help kind of bring these tools to life and some of those kind of challenging terms and phrases and concepts.
And it's just the right thing to do. It's just the right thing to do, is because we are seen as the experts because we're technical. Well, let's just knowledge share because it's the right thing to do.
I think also it's who says it as well as what's said. So it can be quite powerful having someone who is part of the audience you're trying to impact, explaining. So I'm Craig. I'm in the X community. I struggled with these terms, right? But then I hung out with Pete, and Pete made me smart. So this is how we talk about it. Yeah, you shouldn't laugh at that bit, Pete, right? So Pete taught me how to talk about it. So I'm going to talk to you in the language that we use. So this is what it means. So it's the power of simplicity and the power of like who says the message as well as what's said. So for me, really good talking about how to get started. So in that, like, you know, the extremes, right? So go to the coffee shop, go to the pub, go out for lunch and talk about the extremes.
Yep.
When you come to the office, let's get in the middle and talk about practicalities. So how do you get started? You set those guide rails, right? So let's start the guide rails. Let's start iterating them and making them better. Let's focus on the outcomes, right? And let's focus on the people and how we get that people change and buy into it. As you say, then we can start to corral all the activity and it starts to grow and grow. And I think, you know, summing it up is, I would say just get started, right? So like, you know, acknowledge that you already have started. You're already at the start line. Get started. Get new pals. This is a people thing. Get people that have been there before, help take you on the journey. And I'm going to paraphrase you, like build for now with an eye on the future. Like, so a lot of what I heard today was like, it is easy to prevaricate, right? It's much harder to get started to make decisions. And once you're going, bring it back to Kez, that transparency and honesty is really going to make you a different type of leader, a more impactful leader. So on that thought, right, let's wrap up. So thank you very much for your time. And I guess the question for those watching is, how are you going to lead through this change? Are you going to lead with honesty, transparency and enthuse people? Or are you just going to be one of the people that keep you at the start line and do nothing?